Hola, muy buenos días.
Good morning. And to all the attendees, or good morning, good afternoon, whatever is the case. I am Mrs. Bravo. I'm coordinator of investigation of the Inter-American Conference of Social Security Studies. And this time, I'm together with Dr. Teran on behalf of our director, Daisy Corrales Diaz, who conveys you their greetings. And she conveys the gratefulness to our panelists that are in this webinar. That is the second demographic transition. The aging with a low fertility in Latin America. It has been coordinated and organized by the Inter-American Conference of the Senior People, CDS. I give the floor to Dr. Diego Teran, the coordinator of the event, and he will give the introduction of this event and of our panelists. I wish that this is a wonderful event, and I thank you for your attendance. Good morning to all of you that are here with us this morning or this afternoon, for all those member countries of the Inter-American Conference Social Security that are attending in the afternoon. Today we will be covering important subjects that from different disciplines have been discussed and have discussed about the challenges in the future. This is the title of Demographic Second Transition with low fertility index countries in the Latin America and the Caribbean. And to all the attendees that are not familiarized with this concept of demographic transition, it refers to a population transition process where we see how demographic structures are transformed. It was common that population was seen as a pyramid, as a three equal sides triangle. But due to the different changes that we underwent in the second half of the 80s in Latin America, due to the low fertility level in all the American countries, there was a process, lateral process, that had to do with the demographic aging. From that, we saw that in the 80s, no American country had a fertility index, no global fertility index could reach 2.1 per woman. And so the accelerated aging was given in the region, different to Europe and Asia. Here, it's a continent that is facing this accelerated aging. And therefore, we have been facing several challenges. Besides of talking of this population transition process, we will be discussing with the luxury panelists about
nos referimos a que cada vez afortunadamente
because fortunately humanity have conquered longer life expectancies, but also we see changes in the fertility level of population groups, and every time fertility is postponed by women at later parts of their lives versus what was registered in last century. And there are more contraceptives, more efficient contraceptives. And now the group of population of 60 years or more are becoming to have an accelerated aging. CEPAL says that 1 out of 4 people living in the region will be reaching 60 years old or more. What does it imply? Well, we have to ask, where are we going? And if we have a sustainable retirement fund, and do we have a health system to cover a vast range of health services, or we need to include these population groups to the social fabric where we have had. And also, all around the world, we need to see the healthcare systems. In relation to the family care systems, we see the care that all the family relatives give to the relatives. The demographic aging concept has to be conceived on a non-static context. It is very dynamic, and aging in the regions are different with different specifications, and also societies are constantly changing. Now we talk about healthy aging, where we see that we are talking of more active people with longer life expectancies, and now adulthood has turned into longer periods of ages in the region. For us, it's an honor to have a luxury panelist, Dr. Montes de Oca, Dr. Gomez Diane, and Dr. Evelyn Max Monroy. They will be talking from the sphere of action and will give us different perspectives to discuss on what do we need to see on the future. And also, we will be discussing on a vision of a social security guarantee for all the people. And that's why we are conducting these activities from the Inter-American Conference of Social Security Studies. So I welcome you all and all the attendees that are connected here to this event, and of course to our panelists that will be here today with us. I will give the floor as the first speaker, Dr. Verónica Montes de Oca. She will be talking about the changes in the families on the demographic aging context. And I also want to give you some context on her large bio. Dr. Montes de Oca is a sociologist, a professor in demographics and social studies, specialized on population, graduated from CEDUA College of Mexico. She is a professor in the UNAM since 28 years ago, member of the National Investigation System Level 3. In 2012, was awarded as the coordinator of the interdisciplinary university coordination and specialized on aging, and she gives different cultural lectures. She is an author and coordinator of many books, as for example, Community Networks, Aging, and also Transnational System and Aging, and that is published on the UNAM. And the seniority, how does it see aging, and also interdisciplinary investigation, and she has given many classes. And one of the last publications is Seniority versus COVID-19 and also aging. The expertise is demographic aging, seniority, families, homes, and the population versus aging in Mexico with a transnational vision. And she has been a chairwoman of the Latin American Association of Population from 2017 to 2018. And she was the only Mexican in Latin America to attend the Nobel Prize Award in 2019, The Future of the Aging, that was organized by Nobel Sweden Foundations and the Foundation of Spain. And these are some of the aspects in her bio. Doctor, I'll give you the floor. Thank you very much, Juan Diego. Thank you for the introduction. My regards to Gwendolyn and Dr. Isis. I'm going to try to continue with this emphasis that you have put on the topic. I think this is a very important subject and we need to reflect upon it. I need to reflect on the more important transcendental changes that we have undergone, and that, in my perspective, I think suggest the title on the lecture that you have suggested. I don't want just to focus on the healthcare system, but on the family structure and how does it need to happen in the international changes and how all the communities are being transformed right now. And for that, I'm going to give you an international panorama and the demographic context that is very familiar to you and something that in the university we learn and we are concerned and we have investigated a lot together with my colleague Garay, Nava, and others are the family changes and the impact in society. And also, I will be talking about the events that will be coming together with long age and how the intergenerational relationships are given and also intragenerational relations. I want to remind all our attendees that we underwent important changes in the 20th century, mainly economic changes, as for example, the tertiary population. We went from producers to the service provider. And on that, social security institutions came out, and we had the social protection systems. But also, in many countries, there was a reduction of employment, and also women were participating more and more in the market. Many countries, we underwent political changes to reaffirm in a certain way the protection to families. And many social programs came out, suddenly emerged during all the period. But also we had social important changes that were given together with the reduction of fertility. And well, fortunately, women are more and more educated, receive more and more information on family planning systems, and they have achieved the essential rights in order to decide by themselves the reproductive function. Of course, we have seen changes, not all what we wanted. There are many that still need to be made, but there have been a change of roles. For all of us, the demographers and scientific investigators, all the information sources are of great value, and that have brought substantial evidence in order to carry out more analysis. At an overall panorama, I have to mention among the demographic changes, we see families that are having less members, and there are a greater index of divorces. And this is going together with the demographic change, the decrease of mortality levels, and social, economic, and educational changes. So there is a change in the family formation. Families are transforming permanently. And of course, there is a change in the intergenerational coexistence. And of course, this is due to longer life expectancies and also due to a phenomenon that is very important and that has to do with the demographic aging and with the longer life expectancy that goes parallel to three aspects: the aging, the feminine substantial role, and also the decrease of poverty. I think that these three aspects are the most important that we need to have in our radar when we talk about demographic changes that were mentioned by Diego also. And they are in the context of the epidemiological changes that we are seeing, mainly on the communicable disease transmission. And also with the appearance of COVID-19, we need to rethink on having a mixed coexistence and where are the larger communicable levels in the communities. Together with all these changes that we are living in the 20th century, in the beginning of the 21st century, we have seen an important transformation in the storytelling of the aging. 20th century saw many storytellers where the aging was almost equal to disease, and there were a lot of clinic and geriatrics documentation. And also after the Second World War, the documents were abundant. But also with the World Aging Assembly and the forums of the civil society of senior people, we have emphasized all these demographic changes, but also the impact that it has on people. I'm going to emphasize many topics that can be linked one with another, but one important is the existentialist nature of policies since last century. There has been an important discussion to transfer that existentialism concept to a side that is focused on the human regime. In this transition, there is an important element. Part of the assistentialist panorama that protected the policies toward senior people or towards childhood or women left a lot of the government responsibility on the families. That's why when we talk about the demographic changes, we are making us think on the changes on the family and the role of women in the formation of the members of the family and the intergenerational education. In many of these events, we discuss subjects on not to just emphasize senior people in family, but we discuss on the human rights to bring the state as the main responsible of its protection. And we are linking it to policies of care of people, of having long employment lives, and also palliative resources usage. So, in the middle of these demographic changes, the literature has called it the second demographic transition. And so we need to take into account that from the world perspective, we are going from depositing this responsibility on the family to the government. And as Diego says, the decrease of mortality is for me a very transcendental change. These are processes that are being happening since the 19th century. And in the second half of the 20th century, we reduced the women's productive life. And so, as you say, these generate a replacement index that is less than the replace of women versus men, because also in Europe we are seeing a reduction of population. They are having negative numbers in the population growth. They are seeing a lot of migration, and they are having a longer life expectancies. But also the demographers are seeing another phenomenon that has to do with transnational bonds and how the migration is reducing the sizes of families, and how, based on the aging of the North Hemisphere, we are establishing migration routes from the south to the north. And in the last 40 years, we are seeing emergence of transnational homes with greater migratory indexes. And also, In order to impose the neoliberal process, we saw dictatorships or wars to impose once again the neoliberal policy. And that mobilized a lot of people, migration, and also in the Mexican northern border, we have seen a lot of migration, or in Colombia that lived 50 years of wars. All these changes have been accompanied by cultural important changes, and we are seeing aspects that we were unable to talk about in the past, as for example, family violence. I also have to mention that there have been studies about the configuration of homes, life family circles, or how the binary new home structures have the small family number of members. For example, in Europe, they are discussing in the Oxford Institute of Aging, and they are emphasizing these studies. What is an important element in all these aspects? Well, for me, it's a fascinating topic. First, in the longer life expectancy, and in among also the family members, we have many important aspects. First, the links between parents and grandparents and the senior people. These are phenomena that are recent. Maybe we haven't had a lot of demographic history, but at the beginning of last century, orphans were abundant, and mortality was a very common factor. Many people didn't know their grandparents and many times their parents. Why? Because mortality was high. But now, with a lower mortality rate, there is a closer coexistence between parents, grandparents, and children in different portions of life. And also, maybe we are able to see the grandparents, and that is very important because that is happening just in the middle of the beginning of the demographic transition. That, of course, we will see more and more in the second demographic transition in the 10 or 20 more years. So that will impact, of course, the intergenerational links. And here I have to talk about another element. Based on all the configuration of homes and families, as Diego mentions, in spite of all the effort for not just giving the responsibility to homes, but also to give more responsibility to the government, the truth is that all over the world and more in Latin America, there is a long history, a long tradition of care among generations. First, parents took care of children, and then the children took care of parents. But in all cases, we need to be precautious in not to give generalized statements. But yes, there is something that is coming out. As Angeles Duran says, there is a new social class that is a social class that takes care. And by giving care to some people, maybe they receive salaries. But also, we are listening more and more in the medicine and in the Mexican politics arena, and also in certain collaborations that we have had in certain events to discuss the future challenges for next year. And we need to talk, as Diego says, the communitary care systems. I wrote Communitary Networks book based on a CEPAL book. The idea was to stop seeing the families in order to begin seeing the community. And Rocio Enriquez called it new politics. And so it seems that there is an emergence that is conciliating our position with human rights. And we will continue to see the family that is undergoing a lot of cultural, economic, social, and demographic changes. But we will stop imposing on it the whole responsibility of the care. On the other side, and we were discussing this in a meeting about the institution of aging people. Well, this unfortunately has been impacted by COVID. COVID has bring tragedies, but also positive things. And one of these positive things is that with COVID-19, we focus on the long-term care institutes. So we went to this meeting where 30 people participated and they discussed on these type of institutions. Why? Because many families and many people had lost their family members, and due to wars, globalization, to the transition of family members to other countries, or to low fertility levels more in Latin America than in other countries, and also because many people died due to different causes. So people stop having their family members and stop having community and that can help them undergo the seniority they are having. But also the organizations of civil society are having more predominance. Diego was talking about housing. Well, in Europe and in Spain with our colleagues of CSIC, they talk about the cooperative housing systems. There are new mechanisms that are emerging in, and they are bringing another set of activities in order to have a community care system, long-term caring institutions, models, social models center or focus on people. And also we discuss also about civil society organizations. There are a lot of intergenerational discussions and many links emerging from there. Maybe the link will not be so intergenerational, but it will be a combination between intra and intergenerational. I don't know, but we need to have a clear idea of these concepts. I also clearly remember, and you will not let me lie, about the classes of fertility microeconomy. For example, having the right of having less children. That implied a lack of protection from family members to some other members of the family. But this goes backward from the Nobel Awards given to some economists. But in our own reflections on demographic transitions, we continue to think on families as the basic core element of the care. This has been discussed in many international forums where the state needs to be responsible of the care to people, and not only in aging process, but also throughout life. And well, there are many events that face the families. So, and the individual and personal longer life expectancy brings more processes of generational coexistence and exchanges, but also the moments are longer where we can live important events, as for example the vacuum nest, the challenge of having no children when they married, or seniority. I was reading an Esteves articles, and I saw how the unipersonal families are emerging in many countries.
but also throughout their lives. There are many people who have lived alone all their life, and this is highly important. We also see retirement, the deterioration of health, and this other thing that I'm going to tell you about, I think is substantive. We see a weaknessing of family networks, and social might be also the case. And what's interesting is how community networks, other networks, non family networks, emerge in all these care or will emerge in all these care processes. So I think I'm a little over time. That's right, Diego. I would just like to say that in all this process that literature says the calls the second demographic transition, we will see how this all takes place with COVID-19 as well. I think that we're going to see an increase in fertility a little bit because of these confinement procedures, but the trend will continue in the future. And this has to go hand in hand with human rights and with the ever growing positioning of Social Security, as you mentioned, Diego, or as told Simone Cecchini recently, the emergence of horizontal procedures in society and emerging housing that is not backed by family, rather, well, that can address with all the complexities that are involved, because it's a very complex topic, as my colleagues will say. It involves the different tasks that care involves, but also the different modalities of care. It's not the same to care for someone with Alzheimer's than to care for someone with diabetes, or someone that had an accident, or someone with dementia. So there are impressive differences that exists and that we will see more sharply in the future, because these are long lasting diseases. And in the face of this perspective, what CEPAL is doing, what the United Nations is doing, is very worthy, especially what is being done for next year in terms of intergovernmental agencies. And the third World Assembly on Aging, which goes hand in hand with what the WHO has launched as the Decade of Healthy Aging, because they're preparing young people and children and young people for the next 20, 30 years in which they themselves are going to undergo their own aging process. So there are many topics that we can keep on discussing. I simply wanted to say that we need to care for families and the size of families, because sometimes we give a lot of elements to ultra right groups that are against women's liberation and their fight against illegal abortion, and their fight for legal abortion. And we need to care for the right of human beings for care, and we need to boost a larger supervision of long-term facilities and reinforce the networks that we have. Our community networks and social networks, our work networks, everything in the framework of human rights, labor rights, social, environmental, and cultural rights, which are also part of the protocol, as we saw. So I think that we need to take into consideration all of this, because these are parallel improvements that are taking place in demographics, but also in the realm of international policy narrative about aging. And on the other hand, we mustn't lose track of the inequality processes that have taken place in the last 40 years that go hand in hand with many processes As I mentioned in the beginning, with the long expectancy that has been prolonged, that will come with a feminization of aging. And of course, we want men to live longer with us, but also the feminization of care. Sepal and Alicia Bárcena and everyone has mentioned that this is one of the elements that gives to inequality. And of course, the feminization of poverty. I think that all of this are effects of very unequal economic systems that we need to keep in our radar because this is not very automatic. We need to go and see all these situations: migration, globalization, transnational companies, and these economies, but also how examples and good practices appear in civil society organizations, long term facilities, and also community care strategies. And just to wrap up, the degree that UNAM opened on community care and aging is one of the most avant garde initiatives that our university has had to prepare to develop community in aging. So the intergenerational convergence is implicit there, and the creation of an ethical intergenerational commitment based on human rights and everything that involves being well in community. I'm going to leave it at that because I know that my colleagues will enrich this project. And Diego, I hope I contributed with some ideas to this sea, this ocean of reflections that demographic studies on aging provides, and also the different types of aging and the ways we age, and how this senior citizen term, as we saw yesterday, is so important and must be the center of all of our reflections. So thank you very much. Thank you, Veronica, very much, because you do increase the overview of the challenges that come to us as a society. I would like to stress your reflection about how we're in a system in which we're thought of as individuals, but we must always keep track that we are social beings who interact with our first unit, family in this case, and then society. So, talking about this principle of co responsibility with our peers and the solidarity that must be created among societies to build societies that tend more towards equality and to face the amount of inequalities that exist in societies, especially when we know that at when we know that after having demanded care, we will demand care as well in the end of our lives. So we must always have a human rights perspective and must never forget that everyone has the autonomy to decide when we're going to be looked after and how. So thank you very much for your participation. Now we will hear Dr. Julieta Odone, who will speak to us about strategies for care in the face of global aging. It's such a pleasure to have her with us. First, let me introduce you to her. She has a degree in sociology by the University of Buenos Aires. She has a master's by the University of Córdoba and a PhD by the University of Buenos Aires on sociology. She is a researcher in the CONICET Research Center, director of the Aging and Society program at the Social Science faculty and taught at the social science faculty at UBA University. She has given lectures and published in many scientific journals and magazines. She has assessed the work of many international agencies on aging and has collaborated on work papers with our commission, our Senior Citizen American Commission. So we welcome her. You have the floor. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. After the very complete and important dissertation of our colleague Veronica, I am going to repeat some of the concepts I work with in my presentation, talking about this topic with uh, Latin American elements and thinking about the future that these socio-demographic changes imply in the world and reflecting from that starting point. Let me just share my screen. Well, I just have a few charts that show what has already been said. It's interesting to see the aging process. This is the aging process of all regions in the Americas, where we see very clearly how all countries, despite of their differences, will become aged in the region. Aging came here to stay, and beyond what this pandemic might have modified and what this pandemic could modify in terms of life expectancy, there's a certain belief that is generalized that says that this will not modify the current aging or the current characteristics of populations aging. This shows how fertility in our countries decreased and how in the next 50 years all of our countries are going to behave similarly. We can say today that there's a similarity in behavior, but fertility will be equal in a few years in the future, such as the case of the life expectancy at birth. While there are some differences on the origin of the statistics in the 1950s, all countries will face the same situation. What is interesting of this case is what this means in broad terms, and where we see this is in the children from 0 to 14 years, which will decrease dramatically. And therefore, the care efforts will go more towards the 60 and over population. This is the inverted pyramid. So the populational aging process is a challenge to the long-term care demand. And the calculation of care demands is based, of course, this is a theoretical number of the potential care providers in relation to the population that might potentially need care. What we see is that according to the regions, the blue and the gray will see all the potential reduced to half. The Andes region is going to go from 8 to 3.8. the Central America region is going to go from 8 to 4 as well. So this ratio from care and care providers are going to go divided by half. So I like to show this drawing because it relates to the populational pyramid when they had the one-child policy in China. Basically, what this shows is I'm they're basically lacking two generations of old people because in Argentina and many other countries in the world and in the region, there are families of up to 5 generations living together at one given time. In this part of the world, centennials are becoming more and more visible in Argentina based on the last census and in the most recent forecasts for retirees. Basically, saw a doubling of centennials in a very few years. So clearly, these 5 generations might appear in one family very well. And this was said by Veronica in one way or another. It decreases the possible care providers and what appears in everyday life in research is that older people, many old people become care providers and care financiers, both physical care for other older people, as well as care for children and care in terms of finances to the family. So this idea or this myth of old people being a burden where the care for them is going to be a burden. Research and everyday life really shows that this is not the case. If we see what countries in the region are thinking about and what are the problems that are considered the most important ones, I think that this chart from Zebal is worthy to take into account because human rights offices show in purple what their issues are, while blue shows the what the governments think of the problems are. So we're seeing these uh, mentalities within the governments in the region. What we see is that governments are concerned for the care burden and the pension system and for work or labor, which basically is part of a current and future problem for many countries in the region because of feminization of work and unemployment in the region, while for human rights national offices, it is rather awareness, health, discrimination, and poor treatment. Those are the problems for senior citizens in the region. This is these problems as considered by these policy makers for the future both are concerning because it is true that ageism and these stereotypes of old people have not been destroyed despite the years and the awareness that we do about their problems in our current societies. These myths of vulnerability, dependency, sickness, of not being able to do appear permanently. And for example, the COVID-19 pandemic was clear in this sense because it cemented two societies that are part of the three-party system that the relationship of this virus had not relations with generations, and that is why senior citizens started to be part of the problem again. And it is key, both longitudinal studies, especially one of the last ones done in Switzerland, are interesting about the real dependency of senior citizens and care needs. And in the region in general, don't have longitudinal studies, but the ones that we follow in Argentina that were done since the 70s to today let us know that with the passing of time, health, or rather, healthy life expectancy has been increasing in our countries. In particular, we see very clearly that after the year 2000, senior citizens or older people, our studies show that that fourth age where we used to see that vulnerability or stopping doing some things moved from 65 to over 80 years. In terms of average, I mean, we don't want to their age or very skillful people in older ages, but the reality is that both the Swiss study and many other studies that might be cross-sectional and comparative show that most old people in our societies die with a certain degree of self-worth, with, yes, certain degree of fragility, but also a certain degree of self-worth. Around 8 and 10% of the population is truly the one that needs special care. In general, the myth or the look or the fear of care shows or creates an ageist look because they focus on that 10% of the population. In the case of Argentina, the last study done in the PISAR survey done by the Science and Technology Ministry, which was done for all Argentinian regions, says that 9% of old people require care from others to resolve their everyday life. And that group is made up really by the poorest in the society, by the oldest in the society, women who live longer, and there is a difference, there's diversity, and this is applicable for all countries in the region. This diversity in aging is very much influenced by the socioeconomical context, the socioeconomical level, and the life conditions that take place throughout life. That is, a large part of the future policies needs to focus on investment throughout the course of life in order to achieve a healthier aging for all populations. That is, This would have to be part of the policies that we ought to take into account by governments and health ministries for an aging policy and not old age and care. Another thing, if I took into account how the care system should be organized, and if I had to draw this, we could see that care would have to be in all regions, made up by the family, the market, NGOs, and the state. I would like to pick up on what Veronica said. When I showed this inverted pyramid that related to the very few children and the numerous old people in 3 generations in a society where life expectancy continues to grow, what that shows me is the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth ages in which the pre-flexibilization period in the golden years, solidarity among generations was vertical, both economically as in terms of care. And that solidarity and that intergenerational exchange, due to the decrease of fertility, and because many old people live alone who only have one child and one grandchild or none, that exchange is going to be among peers more and more. So I agree with Veronica that social policy should focus on facilitating community networks for support, because for the upcoming old people, and this is quite interesting in Argentina, because in my city, for example, is very similar to this little drawing of the inverted pyramid, and 60% of old people either live alone or in a home where another old person lives. This doesn't mean that there's no family and that there is no reciprocity, but many don't have children, don't have grandchildren, and this aging, this differentiation between generations, uh, demographers might want to hit me. I apologize, but that takes place in the middle of the family, families that are being created. And some families are already like this, for example, mine. And these are families that are being created, and they have as a characteristic, unlike previous families, they have many foreparents and very little descendants. And those descendants have very little collateral family members. So we see a certain characteristics in families that don't really have brothers or uncles or aunts or cousins. So it's very little population, very little children, very little grandchildren who have to care for many old people. When they themselves are old, what we hope to see is for the solution to be more horizontal between generations than between generations, without omitting that there is relations between generations and that they will always exist. If I took the PSAC survey into account in terms of who finances old people needing care, we can clearly see that in all regions in my country, and if I take into account the 4 factors that are the sources of financing, you will see that in the home care programs only exist in 4 regions and in very little percentages. Either a maid or a family member or a friend or someone, because he or she provides the attention or pays for it, whoever cares for old people is the family. The state has very little presence in these care systems, and other factors don't really appear.
So that means that families continue to be in all our region the main care provider of senior people. And in this, we say that this is a family undergoing changes that has many family, very few family members cooperating in this situation. And so we give more care, this job to a woman that is almost taking care of senior people, and it differs in ages. However, when we see in age people who are the care providers, 10% of the senior people, older from 60 people, take care of older people and of older senior people with great disabilities. And in this 10%, 1/3 are male people. That is a spouse or a son that will also be taking care of the older person or of other older persons. I love to show this slide because in Argentina, there are some complaints of the investigations we do based on the need that the state needs to collaborate in supporting senior people in families. Well, those investigations are stated here, and these claims are both from older people and from family members. This was done by the Latin American Center of Population, CEPAL, and it was conducted in many countries of the region. We will see who provides the best life conditions for older people. On yellow, there is the state. On blue, the family. And if we see the different countries in the region, we see clearly that Argentina says that the state needs to participate more and that it is necessary that the state really collaborates in the care of older people, and that Panama or Costa Rica says that it is the family that needs to be more responsible of this care. But here we see the different opinions of different countries. And there is a tradition, long tradition in Argentina and Uruguay for doing this. But because when they have a very generalized retirement levels, and they have the idea that the married people went their own home, and that the old people need to be self-dependent and not to depend much of the family members. But well, that is a tradition, but in reality we see that the care provider of older people are mainly the family members. Another point that is important in the adjusted demographic problems are the family economic support and how older people receive their economic support. If all people wants to be independent, we need to be self supporting members. And in many countries, the retirement agencies are very much criticized, and they are criticized all over the region and all over the world. In our country, retirement age is very much insured, but 30% of the population of all people say that it is not enough to live with dignity, and the rest say that it is enough, and the other percent says that they really have an excess of money. And so we live a critical situation, but also this critical situation has to do also with the political side. How our society is going to configure the sustainability of older people. We clearly see that the majority of the countries have a non-contributive retirement fund or one that causes taxes. But in many countries, the families are the ones in charge of covering the economic needs of older people. The problem that we need to solve and we need to think about is the coverage, the scope of subsistence and sustainability throughout the time. In this regard, I'm not an expert on this topic. I'm talking on a qualitative opinion. But from the social security vision and from the government policies, we need to think how we're going to distribute the GDP and the economy of sustainability in the different people that are dependent on others. So in this sense, the population aging shows that we are not the only population depending on others, because what has happened in the last years is the increase of unemployment rates and the increase of those students that don't study, that don't work, and there is a greater number of population that will not have the possibility to go into a formal employment system. And with that, we need to be totally creative in order to have certain programs for the community, for the economic support of all the population. And what I want to say here is that the cause is not the population aging, and the disaster is not there either, but in reality is the integration of the whole population to a whole healthcare system and an economic system that includes them all. It has to do with the distribution, with the generational agreement, and with the solidarity and the prevent of inequality inside our societies. As a summary, and I will give you some ideas to discuss upon. You have 3 more minutes, Doctor. Yes, I will be finishing. Is the decrease in all the regions of potential caregivers, a great disparity of services and programs for the care of needs of senior population, even for countries having a greater range of services. And there is a need then on how are we going to configure the policies and how these policies need to be integral in and include all the elements necessary for sustainability, healthcare system, and equality for all the members of society that are aging, but they are not old people only. So I apologize if I extended the time of my lecture. Well, I want to thank you, Doctor. Your speech was very interesting, based on all your experiences from the vision of Argentina and all these processes. We thank you. Argentina is one of the countries that has faced the aging processes, and I think all the experiences you are sharing with us are important because many other countries of the region are starting to face these problems. So something that you mentioned, and I want to emphasize, is the survival with longer life expectancies is an achievement of humankind, and a social achievement. But precisely, this is also translated into an aging process and female predominance with longer life expectancy. But I also want to say that social security plays an important role. We know that in the 40s, many of the regions in the past century had the reappearance of social security systems, and that decreased the mortality rate in our region, translating into longer life expectancies. Also, the concept of social security needs to be oriented to universal services because, as we have said, based on all the labor patterns and the economic structure of the last century, made female as absent characters in the labor system and were just at homes. But now they are incorporated into the social system and also people of rights to receive retirement funds. So we need to bring social security as a universal context in order to guarantee one of the human rights to have an economic solvency and also the right to have also other benefits. I'm going to give the floor Dr. Emily Max Monroy. She will be speaking on demographic aging in Mexico. It demands cares, family structural changes, and social inequality. Doctor is master's in demography, graduated from Colegio de Mexico, and has a population degree. And now he gives classes in Geriatrics Institute of Mexico. She is a member of the Geriatric Network in Mexico and has participated in ONU Women and Women for the Construction of the Future, and the investigation line of Doctor is Aging, Family, and Social Inequality. The participation of Dr. Emily concentrate all the concepts that of what we have been speaking, and has emphasized the female predominance and the inequality in social society. I give you the floor, Emily. Thank you, Diego, for the kind introduction. I will share with you my screen. I want to start my participation by saying that I feel quite honored of sharing this space with Dr. Julieta and Dr. De Oca, because they are also two investigators whom I have followed their work, and I also base many of my works on the investigation of both of them, so I feel very honored of sharing this space with them. I agree with Dr. Diego Teran for inviting me in this event, and also to all the organizers. I want to talk about the demographic aging in Mexico, and I want to focus on what happens in the Mexican context, and particularly in the care systems and the demand of care systems, and considering family differences and social inequality. When we talk about Mexico, we need to see the whole diversity of social groups and inequalities. And that is what I want to share with you, a couple of exercises that we need to implement and that are correct for this session. In demographic aging, I will give you a brief context. It's a global irreversible phenomenon that, as Dr. Diego kindly said in the beginning of the session, happens very quickly compared with other contexts. And it is very quickly happening in Latin America because we see an aging population with more demands of care. And here we still have a lot of inequalities, unequal employments for all the family members, and several poverty levels. There is a change in family structures. That is important to take care when we talk about care demand, because as the doctors that have given previously their lectures, I say that care coverage is very much linked to the economic possibilities of family members. What happens specifically in Mexico? Mexico experiences an aging process, the same as in all the region. In 2020, almost 2% of the population of 60 years and more, and will reach in 2030 in 14.8%. And in 2050 will reach 16.3%. Nowadays, population of 6 years or more represents more percentage than those people of 5 years old or less. And if these forecasts are complied with, in most of the Mexican territory, the senior people will be more than the population of 15 years old. So besides of these, in which kind of aging we are facing? Well, the many senior people had a higher dependency level versus other Latin American countries. In 2015, 14.7% of 60 years or more population requires aid to carry out basic daily activities. And inside this population group, more than 60% are women. And that I told you in the beginning, here we see the predominance of females in aging, but also a lot of women requiring cares, because as more female people extends their life expectancy, also demand more care. So we age in a context with a lot of restrictions to provide and receive cares, as the rest in other Latin American countries. In this context, we need to see that both men and women of senior ages have unequal access of resources to cover their needs. And the objective of my presentation will be to analyze the effects of socioeconomical and gender inequalities in the access of caregivers. But here I want to identify the different conditions of access, because one thing is the access and the other the way we have access to. And also the question is, in what degree the interaction of gender and social economic and inequalities affect the access of senior people in the family. Well, this practice was done years ago i- um, in the NSM, and how I took the data from the surveys of 2015. We are going to explore the population that demands cares. Here we are going to concentrate on the access to healthcare services and how the seniority people are receiving care, what is happening with them, and which are the social economic levels. We see, generally speaking, that 50% of both male and women receive a certain kind of access by the IMSS or the ISTE. But also there is a difference between those receiving access according to the social economic level versus others in lower levels. They used to have access to the popular insurance, but now that program has disappeared, and so we need to evaluate how they are going to receive access to other social providers. But something that I need to tell you here is that 50% of that population that will depend on access to health institutions cannot continue to provide access there. And so they need to go to other institutions to receive healthcare services. In relation to access, I made a difference between the family giving an economic pension to senior people and others that don't. Or some people receive bank transfers, and mainly women. And this is something that is more severe when we analyze different social economic levels of women. And there we need to emphasize, because these economic transfers are not continuous, and so generate dependency. Women that are older do not receive continuous revenues from their family members. In relation to the care sources, we need to see the difference between men and women. Men is mainly the spouse that provides the care to the husband, and in second place the children, and so they are also the salaries given to these male senior people are not equal, and many times the care is divided and split in several family members. And this is seen also in social levels. In lower social level, there is a higher participation of children taking care of parents. In the low economic status, it is the wife that provides more care, and in the medium-high economic level, it is the wife that also provides care to the male population. In the middle level are the children, and especially the daughters, that provide care, or as the only caregiver, many times different from men. Well, there is a slight difference. There is a lot of permanence of the daughter's role in the care they provide to the mothers. In the medium-high level, we see an increase of care. There is a mixed combination of caregivers between where we see that also the husband provide care to the women. There is a mixed combination of care provision. And also in the exploratory vision of who gives the cares on and the social economic level, we see a multiple correspondent analysis, and there we identify patterns on how we associate characteristics. The first pattern will correspond to men in the first years of seniority on yellow. There is a low economic level male population with 2 or more chronic diseases. A second pattern on the other side, we put the older men and very highly dependent of family members. These are also single, separated, or widow male, and the care is provided by a son or daughter of other family members, and they are in a lower economic level. In the middle of these two patterns and these two panoramas, we find a male that receive cares in a family with many family members. But also there is a lot of family members demanding more cares, children and other older people. And so in these families, we have 2 or 3 older people with more dysfunctional disabilities. In another context of hope, we see the middle high economic level. The care is given by the spouse, and sometimes the spouse is the only caregiver to the senior, a senior with access to a retirement fund or to mix the combination of revenues to a retirement fund or economic transfers. And the cares will be given by a person that specifically will be the spouse. Or maybe it is not in an intensive care unit because they are in the middle high economic level. What happens in the female senior people? What is the role and which are the characteristics? First of all, we need to talk of women in older that have more socioeconomic restrictions between the 80 years old, older, separated, widow, or divorce, and the revenues will be highly given by the family members or children. And intensive care will be given by only one person giving this kind of care. And we know, based on many studies that we have conducted, that these kind of cares are reducing and their quality of care given to people and also to the quality of life of the care provider, because that is the care provider that receives all the focus of attention. The second patterns are women between 60 and 79 years old that are in a couple but depend on economic transfers. They will have 2 restrictions, both for performing daily activities, and maybe have 2 chronic diseases, and they are, for example, in the low economic status. And the third pattern are women that are wholly supported, and they are receiving the care from family members, but they have access to a retirement fund, receiving the care of a daughter whenever it's required, and that will be the only person inside the family that will be demanding this kind of care. Having seen all these characteristics and all the configurations based on the patterns of care, something that we need to consider is that conditions, as I said in the beginning, can vary and based on the factors associated to the care provision. When we talk about factors, there are factors impacting the care. For example, if a person has a spouse, and more if it is a man, must secure certain measures to have access to care, but also the dependency level. The real dependency, if there are cares that are really associated to the life of this person. Of course, an NSEN is a survey that continues to analyze these conditions. So what happens when there are dependency changes between 2012 and 2015, when the person is in a low dependency level, when it increases to a medium or severe dependency level, And so on the other side, we have the enabling factors. In what type of homes they are, the availability and intensity of cares, and the availability of care providers. And these would be some of the things of senior people in advanced age. And here is a model and the probabilities of receiving cares in 2015 in people that are in unipersonal and extensive homes, divided in men and female and in different groups of ages. 40% of probability of receiving care if it is male, and with 69 to 79% in a unipersonal family, even to a 60% of receiving support if it is receiving an extensive care. And it goes to 25% of receiving care when a person remains in a moderate or severe dependency level, and this probability will increase to a 42% when the person is in an extensive home.
In the case of women, these probabilities are higher than men's, and we see an increase in probabilities of being looked after if they are in extensive homes. What happens when the change is not staying in this state, but rather changes to moderate or higher probability of this person receiving care if they are in an extended home facility? We know that the stay in extended home facilities means a strategy that enables the care, and this care is not a determinate a point, but rather it stays throughout time. We will see changes between the moderate and severe. What happens in the case of the population of 80 and over? When someone is 80 and over, we would tend to think that they require more attention. We were saying this, Dr. Veronica mentioned that we need to be careful with this ageism of seeing people and their health and relation to their age. This reflects itself in these data because one person is 80 or over, we do link a great probability of receiving care, even if their permanence stays even mild, and this increases more if we're talking about people who live in extended living facilities. Another change that we can see is when they stay in permanence levels that are mild or moderate and the type of home they are living in, with higher probability of receiving care when they are both men and women in extended living facilities. There is an element to consider in these brief findings of this exercise, that while people would receive care in monopersonal homes, because in the patterns we see that the dynamic of the Mexican culture and Mexican homes is to support, to bring care to those who need it. But the conditions are completely different based on the social strata that people are in. As we see in these probabilities, the differences are much more noteworthy between men and women, and not so much between social status. So, with this situation, we might wonder, how can we face the challenge of population aging and the demand of care? Something that has been pointed out in literature is that we need to look for the diamond of care proposed by Rasavi, in which we see that the family can't continue being the main source or the only source providing care. We need to migrate towards an idea where this care is shared with the state, the community, and the market. The state with a main role to guarantee the conditions for that care to be provided. And at a micro level, we need to divide the responsibilities of care and being equal in these responsibilities between men and women, because this exercise doesn't really focus itself on the characteristics of people providing the care, which is something that we need to pay attention to, because we both need to respect the rights of the person receiving the care, but also the rights of those providing the care. A chart that I like to share is this one, made by Sandra Wenchuan, that states that we need to migrate towards policies that focus on both persons, both who give the care and those who receive the care, to provide policies, to have relays, to have flexible times, and acknowledge those who provide care through subsidies, through visibility of statistics, through benefits of Social Security. Care represents many times having someone providing that care, and that becomes a vicious circle because they lose the opportunity to have a formal work, thus losing the opportunities of having social benefits, ending up with another old person who will need care regardless of the opportunities or the care that can be provided by their family. And we also have the component focused on those who receive care. And thus, we need to develop social services to strengthen the autonomy of senior citizens. This is why I wanted to focus on the need to see how these levels of dependency, people don't go in a dichotomous way from not needing care to needing care. There needs to be policies that allow people to maintain themselves as active, and they need to maintain themselves with quality of life and with access to opportunities that allow them to keep their autonomy. There are also strategies focused on house visits, care based on community, mentioned by Veronica in her presentation, and long-term facilities. Each one of these policies to be implemented would also require the generation of information. Much of the information that we have today still needs a wide framework on senior citizens, because a lot of the research is focused on young people, and we mustn't lose track that we're heading that way to the need of creating the proper circumstances to have a adequate old age. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Emily. You have given us an overview about the need to do empirical studies with all these longitudinal surveys that show aging as a process and how it transforms throughout time. Something that I would like to point out that you mentioned in your presentation is precisely all this load on gender, because as you mentioned, care many times fall on family members, but has been shown in surveys about the use of time, those who receive this load is women. So we need to think about societies with greater equality. Care is a co-responsible activity of societies. We can pick up on the proposals of this diamond that appeared in the last two presentations. It mustn't just fall on just women, but really it should be a contribution of all these points of view, state, community, market, etc. Dr. Veronica had to leave, but we are now going to go to the Q&A session where we're going to interact with Dr. Emily and Dr. Julieta. I would like to thank those of us who are with us in different regions of the Latin American continent and member states of the Inter-American Conference for talking to us about the role of Social Security in the face of the problems that are going to be dealing with. So something else that I would like to stress is that, as it was pointed out by Emily, aging is not the same, especially when we consider social strata, economic perspective. So this is hard work that is up ahead. We have a question for Dr. Veronica, but I'm going to ask it to everyone. So maybe Dr. Julieta and Dr. Emily to share their response. What are the implications of changes in the family because of aging? There's another question about what are the social challenges that we need to face from different perspectives, governments, families, be in the face of these aging scenarios that we're going to be facing in the future. And so these are the two questions for now. I don't know if you would like to reflect on this, Dr. Julieta. Can you please repeat the first question? The second was clear. The first one is, can you talk more in depth about the feminization of poverty and its implications on the changes of families due to society aging? Well, I haven't worked particularly on poverty and aging. What one can see, let's see, basically what we see is that life expectancy is clearly less in those individuals who live in poverty, but the problems particularly take place in the smaller life expectancy of older men. So it is the older poor women that live the most alone in societies. This is a fact. There are more poor widow women than rich widow women. So this might be a bigger disadvantage depending on the circumstances of these women, whether they have a pension or not, whether or what was the support of their spouse, and what are the family environments they are in. But they would be at a disadvantage in their life expectancy. And in regards to the second question, I don't know if Emily would like to answer. Of course, could you repeat the last question? What are the challenges that we need to face in the future in the face of these demographic aging patterns, and what are the responsibilities of families in the state? Well, the challenges, without a doubt, are manifold. We mentioned at the beginning this accomplishment of allowing people to live longer, but for example, the difference between whether we're aging and we can reach higher ages, but not with proper health conditions. So the first challenge is to create the circumstances necessary for people to enjoy good health. Also, the access to health institutions that help us have this overview, access to equality. We're seeing the feminization of poverty. Women are living longer, whose income depends on a spouse that is the one who worked in the paid labor area. She might have worked in all her life, but didn't amounted the necessary uh, income in order to secure her old age, and in many cases has access to widow pension, which is half of the income of the pension, and in the case of the transfers received by family. And the third challenge would be care, without a doubt, because this is a much longer process that the population is going to need, and we are seeing that families and homes are changing. The growth of mono-person homes at an advanced age is growing, and based on the results that I obtain, while people have access to care, they also depend on having family or children who provide care to them. And they usually do that at a more advanced age when they need more attention and care. So those are a few of the challenges that I can imagine based on society aging and public policies that could answer to those challenges. Thank you very much for your answers. I would like to put some reflections on the table, especially about this concept that was mentioned at the beginning of the session. A concept that, from the economic perspective, refers always to that which relates to intergenerational transfers. In a purely economical context, under this notion of family, where older ages used to transfer to younger individuals. But also, I would like to reflect on about the fact that these intergenerational transfers are limited to what is economical. We see all the wealth created in these homes, not just monogenerational but multi-generational, where we see the role of older people demanding care, but also who provide to the care of all newer generations. Many times, something that happens in our region, people work in informal markets, that they don't have access to proper labor, and that does we need older generations to sustain this system. So I don't know if you would like to share a reflection about this to serve also as your final remarks of these presentation. Well, evidently, intergenerational exchanges exist. They existed from one generation to another and at another time. They come and go, these exchanges. Older generations raise newer generations when they are young, and this exchange is permanent. What we are seeing recently is that the direction of these exchanges with the changes of generations and the inclusion of new generations is changing. The direction continues to go down, or many times it goes up. And what we're seeing is that there's a continuity in the care system, and this is what's new. Older generations providing to newer generations. Because of the increase in life expectancy, we can see people who are 60, 70 taking care of people who are 100 years old, or children, but also the other way around. Many adults, 29 to 40, who go back to their parents' home because of divorce, because of unemployment, because of many other factors. So what we used to see as a traditional care relationship as very lineal is much more scattered and mixed. What happens is that the policy, the social representation is linear, as if the family continued to be a triangle that no longer exists. This is what I think needs to be stressed. Care relationships sometimes are from the family to old people, but in many cases it continues to be from old people to the family. If we continue to think of families, or we can continue thinking of families with a lot of base and a lot of generations. I think that the policy must adapt to these changes, to these social changes, let's say. I'd like to reflect about how it is a wish of current societies to accomplish the maximum life expectancy. A lot of money has been invested and a lot of resources, economic resources have been invested, and human resources and technical resources in accomplishing the maximum human life expectancy. The richest countries have invested on this. We have mapped the human genome. We have seen a lot of improvements in social health systems, and the maximum life expectancy for societies is an accomplishment in human development. What seems to be is that the societies themselves that wanted to be old don't know the place of old age. When we ask old people what their place in society is, many say that they don't know what their place, what place they have in society. So we have this paradox. We want the maximum life expectancy, and sometimes we don't know what place old age has in our societies. And we need to think that old age has a purpose, and that purpose is in everything that old people can keep giving towards human development and general development for the generations in which they live. I think that this reflection needs to be discussed or simply analyzed. Thank you very much, Doctor. Quite a deep reflection that do makes us think about this. We now give the floor to Emily. Thank you, Diego. I would simply like to stress that indeed we must not look at the senior citizen population, at this population that is entirely dependent, who needs care. On the contrary, we know a lot, especially in the Mexican content, that grandmothers are the care providers by excellence of young children, which is a hindrance for their entrance to the labor market. They are not just taking care of these young children, they're also taking care of their parents who are still living and their spouse who also requires care. So they are care providers throughout their lives. They are care provider daughters, care provider wives, care provider uh, grandmothers, etc. And something that Dr. Julieta mentioned is that children go back home. We now know that because of the labor conditions, we can't have our own homes. So old people give that because they had access to housing, and now they are the ones that house children who can't live independently. And after a divorce or separation, they go back home, or even together with someone, the parents' house becomes the couple's house as long as they can't be independent. So this is something that we need to think of when we think of the aging population. This population requires attention and care, but also it requires circumstances to retain their autonomy. And we need to think of them as people who want to go back, not just to receive. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Emily. I think that this is one of the challenges or the roles that Social Security should have. Unfortunately, the Social Security term appears in a three-party concession that is only discussed by those who are in the formal labor market. Here in the Inter-American Center for Social Security Studies, we study Social Security aside from economic functions for everyone to have access to minimal benefits of Social Security, everything related to health services, housing services, and all this array of benefits that provide security to society. So I can only help our speakers. Without a doubt, you have surpassed the expectations of this conference. And you have given us more questions than answers, which I think is one of the objectives whenever we want to raise reflection and raise the discussion on the new issues in the face of these changes in societies and families and populational changes in the future. I also thank the audience, and I now give the floor to Dr. Wendoli, who is going to close this activity. Thank you very much, Dr. Diego Teran. I would like to reiterate the appreciation of our director, Dr. Daisy Corrales Diaz, and our appreciation for our speakers who have very eloquently discussed something that is very complex, that represents a lot of challenges for the Latin American and Caribbean region with many nuances. So we thank you each one of you, Dr. Emily, Dr. Julieta, Dr. Veronica, and we invite all of our attendees to stay tuned to our offers, hours and cadams, and we have a lot of webinars, so you are always invited. I would like to thank Diego Teran for the coordination of this event. I congratulate, my congratulations to him, because this panel has been amazing, especially because of the topic that is so important for the Inter-American Studies Center on Social Security. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.